Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Academy of Eating Disorders webinar entitled Making Weight, a discussion on weight stigma, fat phobia, and athletes with Lauren Anton. My name is Stephanie Brooks, and I'm your moderator today. Also with us is Ronald Pham, AED's membership manager, who's been doing an awesome job helping us get this going. If you have any questions or concerns about the webinar, please feel free to reach out to Don Gannon at AED headquarters via email. Don's email is D as in Don, Gannon, Gannon, at aedweb.org. So that's dgannon at aedweb.org. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. All participants are muted with the exception of the speakers and myself. The webinar is scheduled for 60 minutes and is being recorded. It'll be posted on the AED website shortly after so members can download at their convenience 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In just a few minutes, Lauren Anton will begin her presentation, after which she will answer questions from the audience. Please feel free to submit your questions to the speaker during the presentation using the Q&A text box at the bottom middle of your screen. And I will read them to the speaker when the question portion of the webinar begins. Lauren, let's check your volume quickly. Can you just say a few words? And if a couple of participants can let me know that you can hear her by sending a message in the Q&A box.
Hey everyone, glad to be here.
Okay, Jenny can hear you. Anyone else out there can hear her, I hope? Okay, great. Okay, it looks like we're good on the volume. Yay.
Oh, good.
Okay, thank you for letting us know so much about that volume, and hopefully everything's going to go smoothly. Let's begin. So I have the utmost pleasure of introducing Lauren, and we're really lucky to have her present today. She's a master's level dietitian, as well as a certified personal trainer in private practice in the LA area. She's a certified eating disorder registered dietitian, as well as an approved supervisor through the International Association of Eating Disorder Professionals. Lauren specializes in eating disorder, sports nutrition, and helping those who struggle with their weight and seek to assist clients in moving away from that punitive experience with food and movement to one of self-compassion and self-care. Lauren's non-diet, weight-inclusive, health at every size approach allows clients to shed the rules and regulations that bind them to the behaviors that no longer serve them. As an expert in eating disorders and nutrition therapy, Lauren has worked at most levels of eating disorder treatment programs, from IOP to residential. She's also spoken at numerous national and regional conferences and events on adolescence, eating disorders, and sports nutrition. She's also presented her own research at 2 conferences examining the effects of intuitive eating-based nutrition education on adolescent female cross-country runners. She's been quoted in publications such as The Washington Post, BuzzFeed, and The Huffington Post. Lauren also graciously served as the co-chair of the Academy of Eating Disorders, Weight, Stigma, and Social Justice Special Interest Group from 2015 to 2018. And as well as on the IADEP's Los Angeles board from 2010 to 2014. She's passionate about normalizing and enhancing the eating experience and encourages each of her clients to taste their food with all their senses in her mindful eating experiences. So thank you so much for doing this presentation for us, Lauren, and I'm going to let you take it away.
Excellent. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I am so grateful to be here today and grateful for everyone who's shown up. And so what we'll be talking about today is, what is fat phobia? So we'll be talking about that and weight stigma, as well as discussing weight normative versus weight inclusive approaches to healthcare. And then we're going to move on into taking a look at how weight bias enters into our own experience. It's really important to focus in on this as healthcare providers and those who work with athletes and those who work with non-athletes, like essentially anyone. If you work with anyone, so that we don't inadvertently pass this on to those that we'll work with. And also so that we can identify it in, one, the organizations that we work with, other folks that we work with, and then also, you know, the clients and athletes themselves. So today, yeah, we are going to be focusing on athletes today. And what I'm here to do today is to give you the tools to bring this message back to your athletes. And, you know, also to be able to extrapolate that into just general client care. And I am trying to advance the slide. Here we go. So Ron, I cannot advance the slide. Do we know anything about this? There we go. All right, so back to the presentation. All right, so I wanted to talk about, like, who am I? So currently, I work with high school and post-collegiate folks with eating disorders and disordered eating. So when I work with an athlete, that's who they are. So I don't work with, like, professional athletes, you know, just to, you know, just self-disclose on that. So when I see an athlete, they have been referred to me because they're working through an eating disorder. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about, like, you know, my background. And I actually was a runner from 7th grade all the way through my first year in college. And I ran for a D1 school during that time, a Division I school. And during my high school years, so I specialized in, I ran cross country, and I specialized in the 3,000 in track, so a mid distance. And so during high school, I was and in college, I was one of the biggest runners on the team. And these are pictures of me, for those of you who don't know me. And I'm dating myself a little because you can see that it's pictures of pictures. So there's the one on the left of me is in high school, and the one on the right is me in college. And I was, you know, varsity, and did well in high school. And during this time, though, my nickname was, being the biggest runner on the team, was Roby, short for robust, meaning, you know, I was a quote unquote robust runner, a big runner. And so we're going to talk about that theme today, not just in myself, but in professional athletes and other athletes. And also in college, that's when I got introduced to thinner is better. So in high school, I never had that sort of, you know, way of being around, around running. In college, if the people who were on the varsity team in the top 7 and top 9 traveled, it was thinner is better. And so everyone was working on getting as thin as possible. What ended up happening to me was I ended up getting in that endeavor to get as thin as possible, got very injured, and it ended up completely stopping my running career. So I ended up being one of those runners who just kind of passes out of running, just kind of phases out through injury, and no one knows why. However, I really wanted to touch on Mary Cain's story. Some of you may have seen her in the news recently, in the New York Times. So she was part of the Nike Oregon team and Alberto Salazar, who went down in flames last October as part of a drug doping scandal. And then shortly thereafter, Mary came out and was speaking quite vociferously against Alberto, saying that he did exactly that, pursued thinness with her, made her pursue thinness, a certain running aesthetic, if you will. And she ended up getting completely injured to the tune of 5 stress fractures, and also her times and her performance really deteriorated to the point where she quit, and she has now come out and speaking against him, and others have joined her. So there is now a full investigation going on into the physical and emotional abuse that went on under Salazar's reign during that. But this is a top level athlete who ended up losing her running career. Now she's trying to get it back, of course, but she ended up having a huge pause in her running career due to the pursuit of thinness and a certain aesthetic, and this sort of fatlessness that is seemingly required in running and in many sports, which we'll talk about today. Weight stigma and fat phobia. So fat phobia, I mean, obviously it's a pathological fear of fat, which then leads us into, it manifests as this weight stigma. So as a culture, and we know this already, we fear fat. And there is a huge stigma against just anything other than a very narrow body type, pun intended, why not? Okay, so this ends up having these sort of negative stereotypes. And I know you know how to read, but I wanted to read these words out loud and just hear how they land. And this was in a study that took a look at these negative weight-based stereotypes. And this is what was actually said about folks in larger bodies: lazy, unintelligent, weak-willed, sloppy, lacking in self-discipline, and unwilling to make the changes necessary to lose weight. Those are pretty steep accusations, and also based in just tons of judgment and shame. We don't even need to have degrees to hear that. And that is what we want to be aware of in others, because sometimes they'll have an internalized fat phobia, an internalized weight stigma, and then also in our own selves. So in a wonderful book, and if you don't have it, this is a must read, Fearing the Black Body by Sabrina Strings, who's out of the University of California, Irvine. And this is so important. I think, we need to understand that even as far back as leading up to the Renaissance, fat phobia, this fear of fat, has been outlined and couched in racial terms, with the object to other, quote unquote, and demean and justify the slave trade by doing that, which was booming during that time. And very early on, skin color and the shape of the body was used to racialize the human species. And that was something at the time that had not been done before. And this was in an effort, again, to dehumanize and downgrade to essentially livestock, the human beings being trafficked and just thereby legitimize the slave trade. So this is a really wonderful book. You can see that couches fat phobia and weight stigma in racial origins, which is very, very, very important. And as we know, words matter. So I want to talk a little bit about the O words today, what I'll refer to as the O words: obesity and overweight. These are pathologizing. They pathologize just people's bodies without taking a look at the actual markers of health. They take weight and a body shape and distill it down to that as a proxy of health, which is not the case. We want to take a look. We want to start to take a look not just at weight as the standard of health or a proxy for health or a symbol of health, and in so doing, making the thin body the standard of health. We want to take away that sort of stigmatization and take a look at actual markers of health, and taking a look at the body mass index. That was never meant to be used, and I'm not going to talk a heck of a lot about it today, but that was never meant to be used the way we use it today. That was actually created by, first of all, a Belgian mathematician back in the 1800s, and then it was borrowed, and it was meant to be used in a not in an individual and medicalized way, with the way we use it today. It was meant, and this was also couched in racial terms, but it was meant to be used epidemiologically. And it was also based on a very narrow body type, a European, Northern European, Western Northern European body type. And that was what they took a look at. And now insurance companies in the 1900s started to use that to try to increase their revenue, essentially, and charge people more who were on the higher ends of it. And then also now we use it as a proxy for health. And I think most of us who are here today know that BMI is a really poor marker, a poor descriptor of health. So we want to, use descriptive phrasing, and, something like lower, higher, middle of the human weight spectrum, larger or smaller body. So you'll hear me use phrases like that today. And I very much encourage you, if you're not already, probably many of you are, if you're not encouraging that, instead of using words like obese and overweight. And the word fat, I wanted, because you'll hear it today in some descriptions, some people have, in larger bodies, have chosen to describe themselves as fat. And this is a descriptor, not a derogatory slur. We want to move away from fat as a derogatory slur, because it just simply isn't. It's a descriptor the same way as thin, short, tall. So that's what we want to do is destigmatize that word. So moving on to the weight normative approach, this is typical medical treatment. We know it well. So weight is the measure of health, which I just was talking about. And the goal is weight loss. The goal is weight loss to get to that BMI normal, right? And here's the results of the weight normative approach. So what happens is we have weight cycling, and that is actually more dangerous than being at a higher weight. Going up and down and yo-yoing, that will cause inflammation. That leads to, the increased markers that, dyslipidemia and hypertension, et cetera. So weight cycling in and of itself slows the metabolism. Then what happens is this person who is now trying to lose weight, they've gained it all back and then some in many cases because of this slowed metabolism phenomenon. Now they're avoiding medical care because they don't want to go to their doctor and have yet another conversation, usually not even apropos to what they're coming in for, about their weight. And so they develop eating disordered behaviors, and in order to try to lose weight, and the weight cycling happens again. Many people in larger, and there's a lot of different diseases that are correlated with a higher weight body. You've got to wonder, and actually there's research that has been showing that the avoidance of medical care and the social determinants of health are actually more important, way more important and apropos to their medical conditions than their weight. So we need to stop looking at weight and look at the other things. So here's the medical consequences of weight stigma and weight cycling. Just a few, there's so many. But Tomiyama out of UCLA, Janet Tomiyama, weight stigma, found that weight stigma is associated with increased cortisol levels and levels of oxidative stress. These are precursors to so many different diseases. And in another study in 2018, body dissatisfaction was associated with increased inflammatory markers. So here we see it again. Here we are in 2000. We just keep finding it. Weight cycling results in increased inflammation. And to quote Lindo Bacon and Lucy Aframore in their landmark 2011 study, it may be, therefore, that the association between weight and health risk can be better attributed to weight cycling than adiposity itself, which is what I've been talking about. So the weight inclusive approach is essentially centering the client. So we take a look at health and well-being and we see them as independent of weight. We realize that bodies come in a variety of shapes and sizes, and we don't see weight or fat mass as a proxy to health, as a definition of health. And we're process focused instead of okay, we need to get to a certain weight or get to a certain waist circumference or get to a certain fat mass. And the healthcare is individualized. And I have to say here that health is not a moral prerogative. We do not, we need to, as healthcare providers, not, look down on someone because they have health issues. The same health issues could be seen in a thin-bodied person and not be as judged. So weight bias, so moving to weight bias among professionals treating eating disorders specifically, some of you may have seen this, but if you haven't, definitely take a look at this study. So 56, and this is just the reported, I mean, I have to assume it's more, 56% observed other professionals in their field making negative comments about quote unquote obese patients. And 35% felt uncomfortable caring for obese patients. So they literally felt uncomfortable in the room. They felt that they couldn't really help them. And the weight bias resulted in a perceived poor outcome and treatment outcome and frustration in treatment. So the perceptions, and here we are again, lazy, lacking in self-control, undisciplined, non-compliant, those words, right? And the belief is these personality characteristics are the central causes of obesity rather than genetic or environmental factors. The characteristics of being lazy, lacking in self-control, etc. And so moving to just weight, fat, and athletes, so here's the pressures and beliefs, okay? So we all realize, I think, the pressure to achieve this quote unquote athletic body type. I don't even need to show you a picture and we kind of know what it is. That's sort of, you know, hypertrophy, you know, a lot of muscularization, very lean, and depending on what sports you're in, you know, like different types of bodies, okay? So in the belief that thinner and or leaner will improve performance. Judging, there's always a judging advantage in the aesthetic sports, for example, ice skating and gymnastics. So if they're thinner, they will get higher scores. So that goes, it's systemic. So those are the judges. And so not even just the coaches or the athletes themselves or the teams, whatever, it's the judges. And they won't, so they don't even get good marks if they're not in this thin body. And the rate requirements and categories in stuff like wrestling and rowing and physique. But yeah, I mean, you know, with wrestling, a lot of times they will try to get those athletes to the lower weight category so they can be at the top of that weight category and be one of the biggest and strongest. And that will result in them dehydrating themselves for the weigh-in that day and engaging in just essentially eating disorder behaviors. Rowing, I had a client who got kicked off her team when she got diagnosed with PCOS because she gained 20 pounds and was still, just of note, she was still in the quote unquote normal BMI range, but got kicked off because she had gained weight. So this is, again, systemic and it had nothing to do with her performance. So facts are these. We're going to go over relative energy deficiency in sport and over consequences in a couple slides, and overtraining consequences. So what happens is sort of what happened to me and what happened to Mary, and what happened to all these people coming out on Alberto Salazar's team is overtraining consequences result in injury and a possible cessation of sport. And then, you know, what happens is there's always an improvement in sport performance with the cessation of the eating disorder behaviors. And so I wanted to talk about relative energy deficiency in sport. I can spend an entire hour on this, but I'm just going to touch on it. So this is the International Olympic Committee. That's what IOC stands for, consensus statement. And it can be caused, so it's an adequate energy intake. Essentially, the person is not eating enough to support their level of activity. Now, that could be due to an eating disorder, subclinical or clinical, but it could also be a lack of knowledge about how to properly fuel. They just might, a lot of times I'll see this like when someone is, you know, they come from college, high school and go to college, and their training gets more intense in college, but their food doesn't change. And there's, you know, too often not a sports dietitian to help them properly fuel. Now, this person doesn't necessarily have an eating disorder, but what they'll see, what they'll experience is consequences, the relative energy deficiency and sport consequences, even if they don't have an eating disorder. So that's how that can happen, by the way. So we have the list of entire holistic physiological, impaired physiological functioning. So it's not just, so many of you have probably heard of the female athlete triad, which really speaks to bone health and menstrual function and is very female centered. But this Red S really expands this to all genders, and also expands it to the entire body, because that is what happens. So here's what happens is the potential performance effects. And I really like to show this to my athletes. Here's what can happen when you have Red S. So we have decreased basically everything. Decreased endurance performance, decreased muscle strength. We have an increased injury risk. That's why Mary ended up with Mary Kane in the one that several slides back. He ended up with 5 stress fractures. What was happening was her period was gone for 3 years. That low estrogen caused that. The low estrogen also caused the thinning of the bone, and then she got stress fractures and a decreased endurance performance. Decreased glycogen stores in the muscles. This is the muscle energy. If we don't have energy in the muscles, that's it. Your performance is going to really, really suffer. In addition to depression and irritability, Mary actually had suicidal thoughts and ideation, and she speaks plainly about it in her video. Decreased training response and impaired judgment, decreased coordination, and decreased concentration. So it's not just for running, it's also for, things that involve like soccer, things that involve that sort of coordination, judgment, concentration, that sort of thing. That hand-eye coordination, that's also going to suffer. And so I'm not going to talk at length about this, but I wanted to make a point here. So this is the relative energy deficiency in sport, red light, yellow light, and green light categorizations. So if an athlete is in the red light, we have a clinical eating disorder. So that's what's going to put them in a red light category. Any medical condition that results in low energy availability besides eating disorders, although we're focusing on eating disorders today. And any extreme weight loss practices that lead, to, for example, low blood pressure. Okay. So like I talked about with, dehydrating oneself to get into the lower weight category in wrestling, that can happen. Yellow light, there's a lot of things that will put you into yellow light. Late onset of your period. I wanted, if you could see that in the middle there. And that's anything over 16. I can't tell you how often I have to educate families on this when their child or their athlete is, and coaches will have told the parents, oh yeah, no, it's totally normal. Athletes don't get their period. That still exists today. I'm always in shock because I assume, and we can't assume. We have to be like, no, that you need to tell the coach that that's not true, or get on the horn with the coach. Any prolonged low body fat and or relative energy deficiency. So you can see here, extreme weight loss. So no matter what the weight is, even if they're at a higher weight, weight loss of 5 to 10% in 1 month is inappropriate. So I really wanted to point that out because the first one is like low percent body fat. I think that's easier to sort of spot because it's like that stereotypical, eating disorder, quote unquote look. But if we have a weight loss at any weight of 5 to 10% in 1 month, that is a yellow light. Lack of height growth in adolescence can be a yellow light. And you can see labs and stuff like that. Although EKG and labs can be completely normal, as we all know. And green light is everything's normal, okay? So the next slide, you'll see here, red light puts you in no competition. So many athletes I know with clinical eating disorders are continuing their competition. And the only way, according to the IOC, according to this Red S return to play model, supervised training allowed when medically cleared. That's supervised, not letting them go off and run into the, into the sunset and have, completely unsupervised practices. No, supervised and checking their heart and checking in with them. And use of a written contract is suggested by the IOC. Yellow light, they got to be medically cleared, and they can train as long as the treatment plan is followed, including the meal plan. I got to say that as the dietitian, including not doing extra practices, et cetera. So green light obviously is full sport participation. And so that's my brief, very brief, kind of primer on relative energy deficiency in sport, otherwise known as RED-S. I think we need to be aware of that because too many times parents and coaches and athletes themselves are completely unaware of it, and they can really do well to read that. Oftentimes athletes love to hear that sort of stuff and love to dive into studies, so you might as well hand them the study. So we need to be aware of our own collusion, and then also the collusion of our essentially culture that's steeped in diet culture. So this was put out by some guy out of England, Rebel Fit, on Instagram, and I just had to post it on this. So we can see here, we have this sad face, diet culture, weight loss, and I'm losing weight because society tells me I'm only worthy if I'm smaller and lighter. But literally the same exact actions are completely okay in the next quadrants. Performance fat loss. I'm reducing my fat weight because it will help me run further and faster. Really? Can we just, I don't know about you, but I'm thinking of Mary Kane here. I'm thinking of all the athletes I get to work with. Medical fat loss. I'm reducing my fat weight because it will help me improve my medical condition. This is a whole nother presentation in and of itself, but I've kind of hit on this today, that the purposeful pursuit of weight loss simply leads to further inflammatory markers and actually weight gain over time in many cases, and disease states, not because of the weight per se, but because of that inflammatory state that the weight cycling causes. And competitive fat loss, that is just, I'm reducing my weight because I'm entering my first physique competition. That's what this guy does, by the way. It's always important to know who's talking. So that's an entire, I guess, quote unquote, sport, I'll say, that is dedicated to the pursuit of thinness. So I'll just let that sit there. We want to, like I said at the beginning, examine our own biases. It's so important that we don't pass on inadvertently collude with weight stigma, fat and internalized fat phobia, and fear of gaining fat and fear of gaining weight. So I'm going to show you all some slides of athletes, and here's the first one, and a couple slides of professional athletes that are considered large. And the first one here is Lauren Chamberlain, and she is a softball player. She was featured in, and you can see the ESPN logo there. She was featured in the ESPN 2018 body issue. And she speaks a lot about, in the article, she speaks a lot about how powerful her body is, her athleticism. And I wanted to read you some quotes that are very interesting, and just talk about them a little bit in a second. So one quote is, I said yes for the girls, yes to doing the issue. I said yes for the girls around the world who might see the issue and see someone who looks like them, someone who's thicker, bigger, not as jacked as the typical athlete. And that could give them that boost to love their bodies. And she goes on to say, I am big boned, no doubt about it. I don't think I was ever small. I don't think I was even small as a baby, but I really like my thick legs. I love my thighs. And she continues, I'm fast. It's a surprise. I can run. It's a joke within the league that I'm the stallion. As much as we make it a joke, people know I'm fast. I always say the big girl can move. And then finally, I am not going to necessarily look like the ideal athlete. I will always be thick. I will always be a bigger girl. When I get muscle, it's not cut. I have dimples and cellulite on my legs, but I've come to an understanding about that instead of being picky about myself in the mirror. And and the comment I want to make is, you can kind of hear just tucked in there and she's addressing really you know, her experienced weight stigma and the fat phobia that she has endured. And it's also a little internalized, you know, as well. And, but she is speaking out against it. And I am going to say here, you know, this is still a person who is in the smaller end of the weight spectrum for humans. And we're, you know, she's not the quote unquote typical athlete. And here we have Caitlin Ohashi. Okay, so Caitlin Ohashi is a prior elite gymnast, and you can see there on the left in the pink. So that's when she was doing her elite gymnast activities. She had to stop after a debilitating back injury, and she went on to become a collegiate UCLA gymnast, and you can see her there on the right. So now, well, I think she actually graduated, I believe last spring, but her floor routines were scoring perfect 10s, and only after she allowed her body to be at a weight and a shape that was right for her and not try to conform to an aesthetic. And she speaks out against this. So, you know, and here a couple quotes from her. I wanted to eat junk food and not have to worry about getting kicked out. And Mary Kane actually speaks about that, the runner I profiled earlier. They couldn't eat. They weren't, you know, they got to hide the fact that they're eating food. So you can see the restriction leading to just covert eating, just literally to survive. Caitlin goes on to say she was constantly exercising after a meal just to feel good enough to go to bed. And she described herself as on a path of almost invincibility, and then her back just gave out. And she was compared to a bird that couldn't fly by her coaches. And then, but also by her coaches, she was told that it was embarrassing how big I'd become when she came back post-injury. And there you can see her quote unquote big body there on the right. And that on the left was how she looked right prior to her back injury. Her performance was suffering. She definitely had relative energy deficiency in sport, and that's why she got injured. Healthy, she's you know, completely scoring perfect 10s. And I will add here, and she would probably agree, that the reason why she can't do elite gymnastics, even though she's obviously quite talented, is strictly due to the weight stigma and fat phobia prevalent in gymnastics. So these next slides, when we go through these next slides, I want you to kind of examine what thoughts come up for you. I wanted to profile some athletes that are some of them are professional, and then some of them are not. So Jessamine Stanley is a yoga teacher, writer, and body positivity advocate. And in a recent Instagram post, and she's been really posting a lot about this, she said, "I'm stepping into my sexuality in a way that feels really unexpected. It feels unrequited and vast and complicated and absolutely fit for public consumption. I just wonder, what if we were allowed to worship the divine erotic from birth? What if yoga had never been patriarchal? Do you think that would make the divine erotic less scary?" And she speaks to the patriarchal, you know, this has been talked about a lot in yoga, is sort of the patriarchal way that it is. And then also, she speaks to the fact that she's allowing herself to experience a healthy sexuality, which many people in larger bodies are discouraged to do. So I wanted to move on to Regan Chastain. She is a blogger she writes Dances with Fat. She's a writer. I believe she is still the Guinness Book of World Records for the heaviest woman to complete a marathon. And she has talked about how she is training for the Ironman. And here she is. That's her on the left there, actually getting that Guinness Book of World Records. There's entire websites and blogs dedicated to fat shaming her. She does not have the quote unquote typical athlete aesthetic, and yet she is out there, you know, doing what she wants. She will speak. She speaks quite passionately about the sort of kind of she has that, she acknowledges that because she is able to, you know, do these things and run marathons and be quite active, she's actually, you know, does yoga, that she is considered the quote unquote good fatty. And she will often say that running a marathon is just as virtuous, and I'm paraphrasing, as having a Netflix marathon. And we do not need to, again, you know, kind of, you know, virtualize, you know, or just hold in higher esteem people who happen to be, you know, really athletic. And then Latoya Shante Snell, she is a fitness professional. She's sponsored. She's an ultra marathoner, writer, and author of the blog Running Fat Chef. She suffered with anorexia while in a larger body. And she's continuously fat shamed by internet trolls. Thus the middle finger there. If you go to her Instagram, she has super intense workouts that I don't think I can do. So she is definitely, these are, I wanted to profile these three athletes that aren't, you know, I mean, they are on a level professional, but they're not like Olympic athletes, that sort of thing. And so, and they are in bodies that are not celebrated. And I think we need to, and I love to show literally these slides to my athletes and to anyone I'm treating, to get them sort of to see that there are other people, there are many, many different bodies out there living life, living full lives, being happy. So representation does matter. We need to sort of show you know, our clients and our patients, you know, many different body types. And I did want to hit on the Nike mannequin, which was just so big just last year. So in a press release, Nike stated that they wanted to celebrate the diversity, inclusivity of sport, and, you know, the space. And so they're talking about their new space. The space will not just celebrate a local elite and grassroots athletes through visual content, but also show Nike plus size and parasport mannequins for the first time in a retail space. Now, Old Navy and Nordstrom have done this. However, I really wanted to highlight the commentary from the UK Telegraph, Tanya Gold. She writes that the mannequin is not a size 12, which is healthy, or even a 16, a hefty weight, yes, but not one to kill a woman. She is immense, gargantuan, vast. She heaves with fat. And she's talking about that mannequin in the center right there. So this came up against quite a bit of backlash, including from Regan Chastain. She stated that promoting obesity is not a thing. The idea that creating a world that accommodates fat people in even remotely the same way it accommodates thin people somehow promotes fatness would be hilarious if it wasn't used to hurt so many fat people. A diversity of body sizes has always and will always exist, and people all along that spectrum of sizes, diverse sizes, deserve seats that accommodate us and clothes that fit us and that we like, including but not limited to sweat-wicking capri leggings and mannequins shaped like us so that we can have the same experience of shopping that thin people do. And it really should be that people get to see themselves in all areas of life. And so the Harvard, if you haven't taken the Harvard Implicit Association test, I really encourage you to do so. Go head over there. These are just a few questions so there's one based on weight. And if you scroll all the way down, it's all the way down when you go to the website. And they have many different ones. There's ones on religion, there's ones on, ethnic identity. And so these are things to think about just even now. How do you compare yourself in terms of weight to the people you interact with? Even in little tiny ways. Do you feel cold or warm towards people who are thin or fat? How would you describe your own body? Who do most people prefer, fat or thin people? And I think this is really important. How much do people have control over their weight? Because we actually have less control over our weight than we think. As I hope I somewhat illustrated today, but if someone is operating from the paradigm that one has a lot of control over their weight, then they're going to demonize people in bodies that they don't think are in a larger body. And 75% of web respondents had a slight to strong automatic preference for thin people so far, taking the Harvard Implicit Bias Association test for weight stigma. And health at every size, I wanted to just touch on this. Again, this could be its own presentation, but just to quote Deb Burgard, Hayes assumes that the size a person is when they are doing the practices that support health is by definition their healthy weight. No matter their weight, I would add. No matter the weight, I know, Deb would add. The number on the scale is an outcome that we cannot know ahead of time. We cannot choose the number. We can only choose our day-to-day practices and be honest with what is sustainable in our unique lives, including accessibility to food, social determinants of health. And so moving into a weight-inclusive sports paradigm, as you can see, it's systemic. So it's not going to be on the athlete to change this, but I think they need to understand what they're dealing with. So the focus on performance measures, focus needs to be on performance measures and leave out weight, leanness, muscularity, fat mass, all of it. Tailor training to improve strength, like actual markers of fitness, VO2 max, speed, skill, and endurance, and allow the body to manage its weight and fatness and leanness. And for the weight sports, things like wrestling, allowing that athlete to compete in the weight category that they're meant to compete in, and not forcing them to go to the one down, because that's what's causing the disordered eating and eating disorder behaviors. I wanted to thank you so much for attending today. I wanted to open it up for questions and any comments and discussion.
Hi, this is,
Hey.
thanks, Lauren. Okay, sorry.
No worries. I knew there would be a pause.
So Stephanie Campbell writes, thank you so much for touching on language. I think a lot about this in my work. One term that I have developed with my advisor is weight nonconformity. What do you think about this? She's a school psych doctoral, she's in a school psych doctoral program. And she writes, she likes this term because it's not comparative. It's not bigger than or smaller than what. It also aligns with other social justice terminology like gender nonconformity.
Right.
And can be used in first person language, like a person with weight nonconforming body. So I think that, what do you think about that, Lauren?
I've never heard it. And you know what? My ears perked up. Say it again. Weight nonconformity, right?
Yeah.
I think it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
I think, all of this stuff is a stepping stone. And I've definitely heard, thank you for this commentary and question. I really appreciate it. I hope she's still listening. And I think that, these are all like larger than, smaller than what? Absolutely. These are all comparative. They're very imperfect. And, I hope at one point we just move even away from even the word gender nonconforming. And I think it's a nice little stepping, I think it's a nice little step. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah, I can hear you agreeing.
Yeah, I know. And I think we're all learning about this too.
Yeah.
And kind of figuring out, okay, what is the best language? And
yeah,
what I do love is, hearing from folks who, how are you identifying? And I know sometimes in my practice, I try to, is say, how do you identify yourself? So then
right.
Be respectful of the terms they want to use.
Yeah. Some people will want to use the word fat, and that's great. I'm not going to describe someone's body. They need to that's something they can kind of come to for themselves, and showing them how other people do it is also helpful, so that there's all this terminology, including, weight non-conforming to the medicalized, standards that are out there,
Yeah.
Now,
I want to put out there. Yeah. And so if anybody has any other questions, please feel free to type them in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. One of the things that is sort of curious is with the REDS, how well known is REDS as far as amongst practitioners, coaches?
Okay, so I have, so this is something I have trouble with. And, I always make this assumption that I know it, that must mean everyone knows it. And that's not true. That's why I said, that's one of the things I picked out on that was they don't know that even the whole, not having your period thing or disappearing, is just that's the still said, so I'm, to answer your question, I don't think it's as well known as I would like. I think I operate in a tiny little bubble where everyone I know is completely up on this. I actually had to add this for this presentation because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm mentioning RED-S as if everyone knows about it, and and I need to step out of that bubble and make sure everyone knows about it. I mean, because, I have a different presentation with some of those slides on there, and that whole presentation is about RED-S. That's why I did that when it first came out. And because that's why I said that. I'm like, I could give an hour-long presentation on RED-S alone,
Yeah.
So it's not as well known as people are still talking about the female athlete triad. And nothing, that's part of RED-S. That sort of lack of energy inadequate energy availability leading to cessation of period, leading to bone loss, all due to lack of estrogen. But that just leaves out, genders other than, cis female. And, so, and then also ignores the rest of the body.
Yeah.
You saw every from mental to every single every single part of the body is affected.
Yeah. Molly Parker writes, she's a dietitian specializing in eating disorders. And she was actually just talking to a client today about weight stigma they received in the doctor's office regarding their eating disorder diagnosis. I think that because of their weight, they were diagnosed with binge eating disorder, but were showing signs of anorexia nervosa.
Yeah.
What kind of advice do you have when talking to the doctor about changing the diagnosis when the doctor is so focused on weight?
Right. I would, so I don't know, I would sit there and you're probably right, Molly. And I would, everything that you think is pointing to anorexia, I would outline that, literally bullet point it. I mean, these are the things that are saying anorexia to me. Then also go to AED just put out the new 9 facts, and it talks about weight stigma very directly in those. Thanks AED for that update on that. Then I would also go to AED. I'm not even I'm not even trying to plug AED right now, but I am, because it's I know, right? And then go to, and there's a whole purple book on the medical complications of eating disorders, and they'll see that it's a lot of I'm assuming there's a lot of markers and behaviors that you're seeing that are more anorexia in nature, more restrictive in nature instead of binging. And then also outline how you're not seeing the binging, or that the restriction is leading to kind of binge type behavior, but it's all starting with restriction. So that would not be binge eating disorder. That's restriction. That's like you said, anorexia. So yeah, that's what I would do, is just systematically. And I'm going to say this, unfortunately, some doctors, I've also run into doctors who really value the RD, but some doctors really have trouble interacting with dietitians sometimes, and seeing them as not as up. So we almost have to be almost better up on the research than the doctors, and just know this doctor is probably not as up on the research as you.
Yeah.
So it doesn't sound like it.
I'll often put sometimes client is eating X% only, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
of their
Lack of variety. Yeah.
yeah, and all that, and just sort of like, blast it with black and whiteness of,
Totally.
how can you defend this or yeah, argue against it. Anyway, Tracy Berger, sorry, Tracy, I'm messing up your name here. She asks, are there any educational resources that you recommend to introduce the concept of weight inclusivity to coaches that still practice from a weight normative mindset?
Oh man,
I think
gosh.
I think we need to put something in the water. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I would say I would start with the red S, because it talks in a language that's like accessible, and I'm not going to say that's like totally weight inclusive. Putting together the research, like that one slide I had that had Janet Tomiyama and all that stuff on inflammatory. That would be just even putting like the little quotes on that would be something valuable for them to see. But then also sometimes pop culture helps with coaches, and having them see like sending them stuff on, Mary Kane, the Alberto Salazar scandal, and Kara Goucher is speaking out against it. Like get just these athletes, and they're not completely weight inclusive. I'm just going to say it right out, but they are speaking out against this kind of purposeful sort of trying to achieve this certain aesthetic. And that, on a bigger note, you might want to give them the book Body Respect by Lindo Bacon and Lucy Aframore. That's a book though. It's a thin book, but it's short, a quick read. But and then another good that's not athlete centered, but Sick Enough by Jennifer Gaudiani. That's a really good resource. And then there was another one I was going to say, and now it just ran out of my head. Oh well. But
I love that when that happens.
That happens. But that's what I would start. That's a good place to start. Anti-Diet by Christy Harrison is a nice, accessible, easy read. So again, there's books. I would go to some, pop culture references in terms of like these athletes now coming out. Look up the New York Times article on Mary Kane, and you're going to get also linked to a lot of other things too. So, but that's what I would kind of start with. And also the Red S articles and those slides you can get like online. Those like little, I didn't make those. Those are from the British Journal of Sports Medicine.
Oh, great. Okay. I think we got room for one more question.
Sure.
And it is, what are your recommendations for the use of body fat scans for measures in competitive collegiate sports, aside from just not doing it? I love that.
Well, that would be what I want to say. Yeah, I mean, I think we've really outlined today, like how unnecessary it is. I'm assuming this, whoever asked the question is up against like a whole machine that won't allow it. I would say, I'm sure you heard in that sigh, like kind of my frustration. I would say, you can go individual on it. And again, it's just putting all the stuff on the individual, like saying like, look, the body fat percentage is not the end all be all. Because this happens in the military too, where they will actually not like make, cuts, or they will get fired, because of body fat percentage or a BMI. They're archaic measures, and they don't measure actual fitness. So trying to educate the coaches, trying to educate the institution that you work. I don't know much about like who, where the questions, where they work, but that otherwise, start with the individuals coming to you. And if they're coming to you crying like, oh my God, my body fat is XYZ, and that's not an athlete, going like talking to them about what we talked about today. Yeah. And then maybe even bringing your concerns to the institution, the coaches, the medical staff, and that's going to be an uphill battle. I mean, I don't have like a really great pat answer for that because it's not helpful.
I'm wondering if like kind of ask going back to the coaches or whoever feels the measuring of the is important, and saying, okay, what information are you, like,
Are you
why are we,
getting?
like, yeah, what problem or what question are we trying to answer by getting this data?
Right.
And then from there going, okay, and then how's that serving the goal of whatever the major goal is, if it's to,
Increase performance, usually.
Yeah.
They think like less fat is better.
Yeah.
And I mean, if that is the case, then showing them like, okay, well, are you, this is the thing is, and like a lot of times you won't see the sort of negative effects right away. In fact, the athlete will burn very brightly, like they will actually improve, and then they'll come crashing down. And unfortunately, it often happens when they leave their college, for example, and that's when they're in my office. And so no one ever sees the fallout, and that's what I'm trying to talk about. Is they're treated like commodities, especially in college, in the collegiate arena, especially at D1 in certain colleges, and they're not caring about like, well, like a year out from college, what's happening, the chronic injury, the chronic, the infertility that might be occurring, the now entrenched eating disorder. They're not seeing that part of it. So showing them like research, and showing them at least the red S stuff, because it's just so accessible and it speaks their language. It speaks to, this is going to decrease their performance, that sort of thing. Yeah. So, and I now forgot the original question because I got on that topic.
Okay. Well, and I think we're a little past the top of the hour. So I think we do need to wrap it up. I want to thank you so much, Lauren, for such a great presentation. And I also want to thank all of you for participating. Many of you are, hung in there. And again, remember the webinar will be posted to the AED website later on. And be sure to check the aedweb.org for any other upcoming webinars. We're doing a great job, I think, this year of trying to get more educational opportunities and webinars out to our members. So thanks, everybody, for participating. Have a wonderful weekend.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thanks a bunch. Take good care.
Bye.
Bye.